Hey, everybody, this is Bishop John Solders, and I'm glad to be here with you again tonight. We are practicing our Moral Monday event night. You know, I tell people all the time, when do you think an organization like ours might do things? What day of the week would it happen? Maybe on a Monday? How about that? And so here we are again Monday night. We're here this whole entire month, this month of October. We've dedicated to talking about the political landscape, both here in our local state, here in the state of Connecticut, but also throughout the region and in the country. And so I am happy to have with us our friend, a sister, a colleague who I met any number of years ago. In fact, I don't actually remember when we actually met. I think we bumped into each other at the Capitol or something. We were out on doing something and then said, hey, we need to get coffee. And, you know, that's how organizers talk. Hey, we need to get a one-on-one. And we started using the lingo. I said, yeah, we're organizers and they're on the same team. And so I have had the privilege of getting to know our guests over these years here in the state of Connecticut. Have found her to be a partner, a friend, colleague, and we're brother and sister in the work. And I say that sincerely. Let me introduce to you the executive director of Common Cause Connecticut, Cheri Quickmire. Let me bring her into the room. Come on into the room and say hello to the people who are here.
Thank you very much, Bishop. I'm really happy to be here tonight. It's a real privilege.
We are we as we often do. Cheri and I are colleagues in a particular kind of way. Where there's stuff going on, we generally check in with each other, say, hey, what y'all doing? What you got going on this end? What this is what we're thinking about. We hold sessions together. We're typically on the same side of the aisle in one issue or another. And we run into each other and then we say, okay, we need to talk about that, or hey, would you join us on this? And can we talk about this? Because there's an angle we need to deal with. So you all get it. And I am pleased she was able in her schedule to spend a little time with us to really talk through what I believe are some of the key issues. But before we get there, Cheri, would you talk about Common Cause, its beginnings, what your organization is about, and its founding, et cetera, in its broadest way, and then talk about the work that's being done here in Connecticut?
In the very broadest way, it's about how we believe that we deserve a better democracy and that we need to work to shore up what we have and to strengthen it and to make it better. And the organization started in 1970 by someone who had worked for at the then time president, Lyndon Johnson's, in his cabinet. And he left because he said he just couldn't abide the Vietnam War, and he couldn't abide what was happening in the civil rights movement, and that things needed to change, and that everybody had a lobbyist except for regular people. So he started this organization, which now we have a network of 30 states around the country. We have about more than 1.5 million members and supporters. And we have hundreds of reforms that we've managed to get passed around the country. And so it's a group that works on concrete pro-democracy reforms that we think will stand the test of the time and will go on to become important parts of our future. So we think that everyone has or should have an equal voice, and that that voice should translate into our vote, and that we all should be able to, figure out how to rebuild trust in our government, because that's clearly missing now. And so we work on helping people empower themselves and to really make those kinds of changes.
Thank you. And so you've been at it for a while. How did in those, you said 30 statewide organizations? So your work is structured in a state by state way.
Right.
And then how did Common Cause in Connecticut begin its work?
Well, in fact, Common Cause in Connecticut was one of the first states that was organized. And John Gardner, the person who was organizing, went around to people that he knew in various states and said, I want to start this operation and I need your help. And I am forever going to events to talk about things, and having some person come up to me and say, John Gardner put his hand on my shoulder and asked me to help. I said, that's amazing. But that was a very long time ago, certainly. And I wasn't around in 1970 working on this, but that is sort of how it happened. He went out and met with people, talked to people about what the important issues were to them, and really put together a nationwide network that has grown. And we're not at a point of having a network that encompasses all 50 states, but I expect we'll get there at some point. But Connecticut was definitely one of the first. And one person who always tells the story, if he's speaking at an event that we host, is Senator Dick Blumenthal, who always says, oh, John Gardner came to me and asked me, he was still in law school, but he asked me if I could help. So a lot of people have been involved in this from, the beginning.
Outstanding. So if you could, in its beginning, you mentioned the Vietnam War, and there were other things that I'm going to assume were justice oriented in some way. Could you talk about a little bit what have been other kinds of issues Common Cause in its broadest context they've taken up over the years?
Well, it's different. I should say that it's different in every state because the landscape, the politics, all are different. But there are some basics in every state that we address, and we've been working on voting and elections and making sure that voting rights are available and accessible, and that we are working to stop the kind of cyber suppression that goes on online, which was not an issue back in 1970. And that the disinformation that's being put out into the ether is something that we're fighting in every state, depending on what the issues are in that state. And we work on ethics and accountability at state and local levels, and money and influence in our elections, and that includes financing for elections, campaign finance, and lobbying and corporate accountability. And I mean, the issues are as broad as the concerns are that our members and activists have. So, working on net neutrality or, media and democracy in one state might not look the same as it looks in other states, but it's an important issue for all of us. And keeping the ultra-right conservatives from pushing an Article 5 constitutional convention is something that we've all worked on, and that we're all trying to make sure doesn't happen, as well as trying to fix the filibuster, because that impacts all of us. We think that, our work would be much better, our country would be much better if we didn't have a filibuster to gum up the works and to maintain policy in the hands of certain politicians that aren't necessarily working in the best interests of voters and individual people around the country. So, I mean, there are lots of campaigns. I couldn't even name them all, I don't think. But because we don't have a campaign here around fair courts, because our judges aren't elected the way they are in other states. So there are different dynamics and how that works in Connecticut from how it works in, I can't even think of a state that elects their, Wisconsin maybe, but makes a big difference.
One of the things I started organizing in earnest, when I was a little tight, in and around my local church and then in the community at large. But as an adult person, started. I guess I don't want to say I'm him hawing. About 30, 40 years ago, I started when we started working on a couple of issues. They were passion issues for me, and what I learned fastly is that there are organizations that come together to work on what I would call broad-based issues in any local, whether that local is municipal in nature or whether it's statewide. But then there are these networks of larger organizations or larger networks that are connected to these organizations that do national work. And I was fascinated with not only the number of those kinds of organizations, but the range of those organizations and what they do. And I guess I've never quite gotten over my fascination with that. If there is a something to organize around, in Washington D.C., there's an organization that does it. There are people who are working and doing and who have relationships and accountability. There's money that spins around those organizations and those interests. And so when you hear there's some code that gets used, when you hear interest groups, Or here's a better one. This is one they used here recently: special interest. That's code for some of these organizations that got money and they writing checks. They are doing all kinds of things in the name of what's important to them. Now, I ain't hating. This is in this version of this representative republic, democracy, whatever you want to call it. Okay, let's call it democracy for today. There are all kinds of groups and orgs that are coming together doing their work with money fueling that. I raised that because what you've named is the beginnings. At the beginning, there were some folk who came around a particular group, particulars, that then said, in my state, yeah, we are related to that particular, but it operates in our state this way. All right. Could you talk a little bit about that? And I'm going somewhere with that because for us here in Connecticut, you and I and our organizations and others, we've been partnering together around what I would call our version of voter suppression. But it looks a little different here in Connecticut as it looks in some other places. But could you respond to that just a little bit and talk about that as far
the I think that well, there are a number of things in what you just discussed, and I would say that one way that Connecticut has established a system of campaign finance reform that keeps so-called special interest dollars out of our elections, which has always been a problem here. It was a problem everywhere. But we have, if you participate in what's called the Citizens Election Program as a candidate for state office, then you have to abide by certain rules, certain restrictions. And one of those restrictions is you can't take special interest money. You can't take money from lobbyists. You can't take money that, bigger than a certain amount, depending on the office you're running for. And you have to raise small dollar donations from people in your district and to get to a certain level and then qualify for the program, at which point you'll get money from the state. And it's different, as I say, depending on the particular office you're running for. It's different in terms of how much you have to raise, how much you have to then get from the state. So that's one way that special interests are kept out of our elections in a bigger way than they are in other states. That's not to say there aren't super PACs here that have figured out ways to, snake their ways in and around elections and in and around particular campaigns. But it's a better system. It can be better yet. And I look forward to it being better in the future. So that's something we have to work on. I know you had another question about influence. Was it about influence?
what I was really getting at is that there's any number of groups, organizations that are doing all kinds of issue-based work, right? Common Cause is just one of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of groups. These all of these organizations are tied to their passions, these what I would call interests, whatever they are, right? And then what you just named is one kind of way interest groups become special interest groups, and then they tie their donations to candidates. So that's of one order and one kind. There are other groups that are issue based that then lean into one, raising money, getting money, collecting money, then hire staff, then place those staff in various spaces and places, and then have those staff then representing whatever that interest, that organization's passion, what are their concerns, and all of that. Now, for the for folk who don't recognize this, and that's why I use myself. I didn't really recognize this happened, right? I just, I went down there to the poll and voted, based on who I thought was the best person for the gig, right? And of course, who would be looking out for the stuff that was important to me. That's how I saw my mother do it. That's how I saw my grandmother do it before her, and my family. Here's the thing that then fascinates me, because there are a number of groups, organizations that have large, wide variety of interest, and they are there in the public space, vying for our attention, vying for our donation dollars, vying for our participation in whatever that work is. So I'm gonna bring it home here in Connecticut. You and I think the first time we actually came around each other and was really talking, and there was some passion, and I know you a bit, so I know when you starting to feel your passion. You know me too. I'm plus I'm a preacher, so there's a tone that Black preachers have, and I got it. There's a way in which we speak and speak from that passion place. We were talking about a just budget. We were talking about how budgets get organized, set up, and then how they get passed and moved through the state legislature here in Connecticut, right? And what we were looking for were for workers, for poor people in particular, and others who would be on, one side of the tracks, if you will, how they were being looked out for as it related to our state budget process, right? There's a way in which that gets done. And something about what was getting done at that time, and I want to say that was a decade plus ago, wasn't doing it. Somebody wasn't doing it right. And so we came around some tables and began to talk about what it was that we thought was of import to insert into that conversation, and then to begin to have conversations with legislators and legislative staff folk and people at our state capitol and in the legislative office building around those issues. And I would challenge anybody, just a side note. I would ask any of you, if you don't know what I'm talking about, during our legislative sessions this coming January through May, June. This is a long session, so we might go to July. I don't know. Who knows? But
no, don't say that.
Right. It will go long. This is a longer session. We have a short session and a long session. Come to the Capitol and see how we say in the organizing world, see how the sausage is made. See how what goes on in the building that allow for policies and ultimately laws that get passed here in Connecticut, and it happens in state capitals and in our in city halls and in our national, the Congress. This is how it happens. That there are folk who are having conversations, who are influencing, having conversations, having meetings. They're putting on the table what's important to them, why it should be important. They're educating legislators, because for all intents and purposes, many of our legislators don't know what your issues are unless you tell them. All right. So could you talk about some of that stuff? And it began for us, I believe it was around a just budget. We had some values that we thought were important to a number of us, and we came around tables to talk about what they were. And once we decided, this makes sense, we then started talking to lawmakers and policy makers around what we thought were important issues and important things that needed to be seen and felt in the legislation that got passed.
That was a really important time, I think, because the coalition that we built was very broad. We brought together people who had not necessarily worked together before, and they had diverse issues, but people came together to decide an agenda and went forward with that agenda, which gave us a lot of power that we hadn't had before, as we were in our little separate silos, I guess people say. And so it really did make a big difference, I think. And we did, however, recognize pretty early on that we were up against the big boys in terms of who was financing the opposition, who was financing the corporate dominated legislature at the time, because that was before we had campaign finance reform in the state. And so we did not have what I would describe as a strong enough democracy to really take that on. And we have been working with hundreds of partner organizations and individuals here in Connecticut and around the country to really, fight back against some of the court rulings that have happened that basically say that corporations can spend unlimited amounts of money buying influence. And we think that's wrong. That's absolutely wrong, and that needs to change. And there have been a number of bills proposed both in Congress and in Connecticut that really have made it clear that everyone has the very basic right of the vote, but that everyone also has the opportunity to work together and build power, build strength in numbers. And since 1964, we really have had the opportunity, because of the Civil Rights Act, that prohibited certain kinds of discrimination, that really made a difference in the ways that people could operate in this particular society. And that we, in 1965, then passed the Voting Rights Act at the federal level, which made a huge difference in terms of prohibiting discrimination involving voting, and got rid of some of those early, well, both of those really did, ended official application of Jim Crow laws that we're still operating under in many ways. But those particular pieces of legislation made a big difference. And that's something that Common Cause feels very, very strongly about, is that voting rights for everyone is a basic underpinning of the work we do to strengthen our democracy. And it just needs to be free, fair, and easy. And I think that there's no end of the argument about it, because people are always pushing back on it, because they lose influence. Corporations lose influence. The more people vote, the more people participate, then the more that people have power. So that's something that we work on, prohibiting discrimination in that way, and in as many ways as we can. You're muted.
As often as I work this technology, I still fumble with where the buttons are to push. So you said something that I want to follow up with you about. This idea that money flows into issues that then, when, say, for example, with us here in Connecticut, there's a, I would say, there's a motley crew of us that anytime there's an issue that starts to bubble up as a significant, I would say, political issue where decisions have to get made in a legislative context. It's the same faces, and if we're not the same faces, we're the same organizations. We slide in new people. We have new staff people that show up, and then it's, oh yeah, I work with, and oh okay, there, we get to locate ourselves. There's a genealogy, if you will. There's a family network of a number of groups and organizations and individuals that show up on the scene to say, hey, might we do our work in a more coordinated way? Ergo coalition politics, right? So that what coalition means is we gather around a table, we have some common interest. We don't all do the same kinds of things. In fact, the unique characteristic of a coalition politics is that we are all a little bit different. So for us at Moral Monday and CT Black Women and some the organizations that I'm affiliated directly with, we do our work. And there's for Moral Monday, there's a faith-based component to it. I enter into much of these conversations from a social justice lens. There's a moral voice that we then occupy, and that I'm happy to occupy because it is unique to us. So that people of faith and people of conscience can gather together because we're being informed not only by the issue and the passions that we have, but also what we deeply believe and hold true to how we organize ourselves in spiritual ways and contexts. So Jews and Christians and Muslims and Baha'i and Unitarian Universalists all have something in common, I believe, that is a public witness that then shows up in the public square, that shows up downtown at City Hall, that shows up at the Capitol, at the State House. It shows up down in Washington, D.C. at times. So for us, those are key. It's key that we come around these core values, I'm going to call it. Or can I use faith language? We show up to bear witness. Mm-hmm. To bear witness to something that's important that we believe needs voice and our presence, not just in a surface kind of way, but our involvement over time. Because many of these issues, you're right, we show up and we say what we say, but then we notice there are a couple of other sides. It's typically not just one other side; it's a couple of different sides, and they're coming with their particular voices and with their particular interest-bearing witness to a thing. And often we cobbling together pennies. We have very few resources, so we use our human resources. I'm reminded of what Saul Alinsky said about power. He said there are two kinds of power. There's people power and money power. All right. And often that I have found that to be true over time, that when power, let me just be real clear. It's lodged in the ability, one's ability, or a group of one's ability to act. And when you do that, when you're able to act, when you're able to speak, when you're able to show up, when you're able to move a particular thought or a particular idea or a particular value, you're able to hold that up, people pay attention. And here in Connecticut, we were talking with State Senator Gary Winfield. He said, largely we do what we do at the state legislature and nobody says anything. We just do what we do. He said, however, when I start getting a call, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 calls about a particular thing, then it makes not only me, but all of my colleagues, we pay attention to how many calls we receive, 4, 5, 6, 7 on a particular issue, which means those calls represent hundreds of other people, right? And so that's the kind of work Common Cause and More Monday and others of our friends and partners are doing across a wide variety. There's often labor involved, with us. There are often other social organizations or social justice organizations that get involved. Well, there's sometimes they're very, very particular groups of people, because the particular thing we're gathering around has a very, very direct implication, and we're often trying to center those who are most affected by the thing that we're advocating for, or that we're standing up for, or that we are pushing for. I'm remembering one of those years we were talking about a just budget, and we were really paying some attention to the state workers who were getting a raw deal, and their health care was all kind of unequal, and et cetera. So and we were centering them in our particular call for action, and call for new policies to be brought forth. So can you talk a little bit about that? And I want to spend the last little bit of time on what we've been organizing here recently. I think it's important.
I think the points you're making about bringing people together on diverse issues, but on a common thread. And I'm so very glad that you talked with Senator Winfield, because he is absolutely one of the brightest stars in the General Assembly. And I just have tremendous respect for his work. And he is a huge supporter of voting rights, and especially now when so many eligible people are being turned away from the polls, and when are wrongly, for the most part, and simply or just don't have access to them, like the many people who are incarcerated or who have been incarcerated and come out, but they still aren't aware that if they're on probation, they have the right to vote. And now in Connecticut, you can actually vote when you're on parole. So it makes a massive difference in terms of, additional voices that need to be heard, additional power that can be exercised. And Senator Winfield was one of the leaders in making that happen. And I was so very proud to be able to work on that, to make sure that as many eligible voters are able to vote. And I think that we absolutely have to be fighting to make sure that even people who are still incarcerated have the ability to vote. And that is something that is definitely something that we and the ACLU are working on. And I think that, someone's future shouldn't be dictated by a conviction in their past. And I think that these felony disenfranchisement laws really need to go the way of many of the Jim Crow laws that are still hanging on. And they're just relics, and they need to be gone. And this is, clearly a racist way of looking at our system of justice, and at looking at our democracy in terms of who is absolutely able to vote and who is being kept from voting. And we absolutely need to be working to make sure that our systems are free to everyone and fair to everyone. I'm sure you had more questions that I wasn't taking notes on. I'm sorry.
That's okay. That's okay. No, this is good, because these are the particular issues we've come around and been on the same platforms and been in the same meetings around, and have taken our turns at chairing those meetings and organizing, taking pieces of those particular issues. I'm very proud of those particular opportunities we've had to work together around getting some reform in who can vote and restoring voting rights back
Yes.
to formerly incarcerated folk. I'm very proud of that work. What we're trying to do now with the stop solitary confinement and the
Yes.
dehumanization that's happening in our prisons and jails right now. I'm eternally grateful for the opportunity to speak what I believe is the truth and some truths about what that looks like and the human cost
Yes.
to us and to our democracy and to the community when in fact we exclude people in the way that we do, and then there's not a way to bring those folk, if you will, back home. Let's stay here with voting and here in Connecticut. We've done a couple of things here around the vote. Mm-hmm. And of course, I mentioned this several weeks ago, and I'll reiterate it here. What always seems to happen when we start talking about the vote here, there's always a conversation around, well, if we're going to do that, we have to open up our state constitution, and we don't want to open up the state constitution, and the blah 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 blah. And then there's a whole thing, and for me anyway, my eyes glaze over because I've heard it every time. When we wanted to go to motor voter, right? We wanted to make that a policy and then law, and then figure out how we do and how the Department of Transportation implements that. That was a whole big old deal. Most recently, during the lockdown in 2020 and right in the acute COVID times, we had to have a whole special conversation at the state legislature, just so that we could have absentee balloting and early voting. And so right now, what we did get passed, and it's before us as a ballot initiative right now, when you go to vote on November 8th, I think we're like 14 days, well, not quite 15 days away from our election. That's 15 days away, right, as of today. We have this ballot measure that you'll overlook if you're not paying attention. You'll overlook. But it is a ballot initiative that says, hey, we want to open up our voting like everybody else. It was shocking for Connecticut to be linked with New Hampshire. Not so much shocking because New England hangs with New England, but New Hampshire, but Mississippi and Alabama. Lord have mercy. Lord have mercy. We're the only 4 states that doesn't have in law early voting. Come on.
In person.
Yeah. You got to be in person on a particular day, them 12, 18, 14, 18 hours, or else you can't vote. Every other state in the United States, with the exception of Connecticut, New Hampshire, Mississippi, and Alabama. That's a list I want Connecticut off of. I'm just saying. That's a list I want us off of. Let New Hampshire have that if they want to. Mississippi and Alabama, y'all do what y'all gonna do. But Connecticut need to get off that. Can you talk about a little bit about that?
Well,
our last little bit.
Yeah. It actually, the way that election laws are written in Connecticut is they are in the state constitution, but that doesn't mean they're going to stay exactly as they are in the state constitution. And this particular issue has gone through the state legislature twice and is now going to be on the ballot. And it's ballot question 1. That actually will ask you if you think that Connecticut should have, I'm just going to actually read this question. Shall the Constitution of the state be amended to permit the General Assembly to provide for early voting? That's very simple. And what it does is that then after we pass it on election day in November, then it kicks back to the General Assembly to come up with how many days, how many polling places, that sort of thing. And people are going to debate those, and they will come up with what those regulations are going to be. And I'm optimistic that we're going to pass it in November, and that then we will be able to talk with our legislators about how we think it should look. And I think it should look the way it looks in many, many states, which is that people can vote during the week, can vote on the weekend, can vote, to not just be one day of the year from 6 in the morning until 8 o'clock at night, because our lives don't operate that way. We really need to have a little more time than that to make it happen. If you have little children, it's a challenge to get the care you need in order to get to the polls so you can vote. If you have a job that's outside of where you live and it takes you a while to get there and a while to get back, and you may not get back in time. So it's, there are many, many issues. If you're taking care of someone as a caretaker for a parent or someone who's ill, then you're not going to be able to get there. And if you didn't know that that was going to be the situation, you wouldn't have gone and gotten an absentee ballot. So, and the restrictions around our absentee ballots are very strict here in Connecticut. And if you want to go in and say, oh, I'm not going to be able to do this or that, then you have to practically, testify to that as a truth rather. And so people lie about it, and we want to make that, unnecessary. People should just be able to go and vote.
Uh-oh, we lost you, Cheri, for just a second. Let me jump in and just say what I think it's important to talk about around absentee balloting. This dates back to, in fact, it dates back to the Civil War, when absentee balloting was provided for those of our troops that were away prosecuting the Civil War. And so here in the state of Connecticut, let me be very specific, here in the state of Connecticut. So we have had, Cheri's right, we've had absentee balloting, absentee voting, but it's very specific. And so what the conversation is, and we'll have a ballot initiative very much like early voting is this year. I believe in a couple of years, we'll have another ballot initiative that will ask the question around absentee balloting. Can we get on the books what is called no excuse voting? No excuse voting. What's going to be on the ballot this year is here's our guest. Here she come back now.
So sorry.
That's all right. Technology will do what it do. That's why I like what it is that we do. You got to move around a little bit and find the right spot and hold your mouth right, and then there you go again. You go at it again. What I was saying is that we've had absentee balloting here in the state of Connecticut that dates back to the Civil War. Right. But that's a very specific excuse. What we're going to be doing the next time we come back to this question of the vote, we're going to be talking about no excuse.
Right.
Absentee. Right.
That's right.
Right now, in 15 days, the ballot measure is about, hey, you can vote early.
Yes.
The election will begin on set date, and then there'll be ways to do that during the pandemic and during the COVID lockdown. We had ballot boxes that were placed in strategic areas, in town halls and other spaces and places, and that was an argument for from some townships. There's also been a cry that there's our version of rigged elections. We've had some versions of that as well, and I've been appreciative of the conversation we've had with some of our partners, like the folk from the League of Women Voters, for example, who have been very, very helpful in helping us to understand how the vote happens, what happens with that was almost something. There's something very specific and particular about voters of registrators, registers that do that kind of stuff in every town here in Connecticut. So we've been helped to hear how this process works, and I am happy that this is now the ballot initiative that's on the table, and for all intents and purposes, for let me just speak for me. If we're going to talk about this kind of the form of democracy, the vote has to be open for everybody that's eligible to vote.
Yes.
And there are rules around that. But, once I find it just appalling that in my town, for example, we had the biggest participation on record almost here in the city of Hartford during the presidential elections of former President Obama, and it was only a third of the people who were eligible to vote participated in the vote, and people were like standing, applauding, and were amazed that we had that kind of turnout. And I'm just appalled at it. So, Cheri, you got more to say? You want to say about this?
Well, I think you're absolutely right. And participation is key. Getting out and actually voting is key. And it's important, very, very important, if you think you're registered to vote, that you double check that. Go to the Secretary of the State's website and you find your town. You've checked to make sure that you are in fact registered. And you don't want to show up on election day and be told, oh, you're not on the list. You must be an, unlikely voter, or, I mean, they have different terms for these things. But my son and I went a couple of years ago, and the person at the table there who was checking the names and addresses off, and she said to him, well, I don't see you here. He's voted in every single election, midterms and every other election. And they had to let him vote, and he had to sign an affidavit saying that, in fact, he was a registered voter. So you have to be very careful to make sure that you are registered and that you are on the list. It gets easier because in Connecticut, we also have something called election day registration or same day registration. So if you haven't been registered, you can actually do that on election day. But it's better if you do it ahead of time, and better if you get there prepared with some form of identification. That could be a driver's license if you have one. It could be your light bill if you have one. It could be a number of things that attest to the fact that you are who you are and you live where you live. It does not have to be a driver's license. Not everybody has a driver's license. So you can make sure that you have what you need in order to be identified as a registered voter.
We're going to try before possibly next week or before election day to have a show with and have a conversation with some of our friends and partners from places and groups and orgs like the League of Women Voters, so they can talk a little bit about what that looks like and what that process looks like. You're absolutely right. There are some rules.
Yeah.
There are some ways to do this, but I happen to be of the opinion that if in fact we're talking about this democracy, well, we ought to make the vote as barrier free as possible.
Yes.
And of course,
absolutely.
Just in case you hadn't noticed, I'm a Black man.
What?
And so, right, shocking. And that in this country, there's been a history of blocking people who look like me from participating as a full a human being. Well, first off, by law, there was some foolishness that was politically motivated that made sure that Black people were considered 3/5 human. Now, that's a longer story. We can have a conversation about that. But then once the vote was actually, there was the 15th Amendment of the Constitution gave the right to Black folk and Black men in particular to vote, because it took another 50 years before women had the right to vote, and then it was most often white women, not Black women. Anyway, I'm devolving. We've had a journey with the vote, and one of the things I've recognized, because the vote has been argued over, and because it's always a something that's related to it, it ought to give us some idea that this is important because it's fought over. There's a lot of rancor around it. And so I believe here in the state of Connecticut, we have this opportunity not only to vote for the constitutional officers of this state, and they are governor, lieutenant governor, secretary of the state, treasurer, attorney general, and comptroller. Yes. And we have a couple of historic runs. The comptroller, right, and the secretary of the state. There are two Black women that are up for that job who are running. The comptroller is the incumbent, but she was appointed. She was not elected. So this is her first round at election. There's been a I don't know where this came from, but it's seemingly a written rule that only Black people, the Black person who can get elected and hold a seat in those constitutional office has been treasurer, right? That's, I don't know why. It's
a recent historical fact here in Pat.
It's not. I'm not making that up. That's what it's been. So we have a couple of these historic, what I would say, historic candidacies there in those constitutional statewide offices. But then we have any number of Black and brown folk who are running for our state legislature, and I think they need to give them at least the opportunity to hear what they're talking about, and then you vote your own conscience around that. And I am I'm very clear that we absolutely must allow for the vote to be participated in by as many people as possible. And what I hope and what I'm working for, what a number of us are working for, is that we participate in this vote in record numbers, that we give ourselves the opportunity over the course of in 15 days, the opportunity to participate in the vote, and then we open the thing up so that we can vote ahead of time. Right. All right, in places like Georgia, Georgia, in places like Georgia, they're already voting.
Yeah.
Unlike here, where we got to wait until the election day to vote. However, the next statewide election, I hope this thing passes overwhelmingly, and that we can participate with the 20th century and the 21st century. We can come on into the 20th, 21st century in doing so. Cheri, we're at time. I appreciate very much your willingness to participate. I told you we could chop it up for an hour. I appreciate very much your willingness to be with us this evening tonight to talk about the work of Common Cause, to talk about our partnering together. We look forward to the ways in which in this coming year, once the dust settles,
Right.
once the dust settles, we got more dust to kick up. All
That's
right.
it.
That's it. I appreciate you very much. Appreciate
Thank you very much.
in
It's
Connecticut.
been a pleasure.
I appreciate it. And we'll see you all next week. Or whenever you watch this. This is posted up on our social media platforms and on our website, moremoneyct.org. It'll be embedded there. We look forward to talking with you again. Can I give you a secret? Don't tell anybody. Well, maybe you should tell anybody. We will have some other guests coming, and if this has gone well for Cheri Quickmire, she'll come back again. How about that? All right. All righty. We appreciate it. We'll talk to you folks later. Thank you again. Peace. We're out of here.